immediate 30-day ceasefire. During that time, serious negotiations would begin. But before we get to that point, Russia itself has to agree to this proposal. So now suddenly Vladimir Putin is the one under pressure, not Volodymyr Zelensky.
And if it is agreed to by Russia, I mean, there are fears that Russia could use the time to rearm and attack again. What would happen if they broke that ceasefire?
Well, Gemma, in any war, in any ceasefire, both sides can do that. You know, clearly these two neighbours do not like each other, they don't get on well, they're at war, and a 30-day pause or ceasefire would give both sides that chance to rearm and regroup. That would happen under any ceasefire. We've seen that with Gaza between Israel and Hamas. And so that's always a factor. But if the end of shooting for at least 30 days, you know, surely that's a good thing, and it may then lead on to longer term peace, and it will be a challenge to see whether that can be enforced. The Ukrainians, of course, don't believe that the Russians are acting in good faith, and Donald Trump would have to try to ensure that that peace held. So this is simply the beginning of the process, certainly not the end.
Now, John, it's been announced the US will resume intelligence sharing and security assistance for Kyiv. Is this part of this agreement?
That's right. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, immediately announced that the US would be resuming its military aid and military intelligence. That was, of course, cut after that acrimonious meeting in the White House. That gave Russia a huge advantage on the battlefield, and psychologically it gave them a big propaganda victory. That's been resumed. So suddenly Russia is realising that they thought that Ukraine was completely isolated and that the relationship between the United States and Ukraine had broken down irrevocably. What this latest development coming out of Saudi Arabia indicates is that, in fact, Ukraine has managed to get itself back to the table. So this is actually a major victory for Ukraine. This is important for them to get back to the negotiating table, from which they really had been excluded for some time.
And was anything further said about a security guarantee from the US to try to prevent Russia from invading again?
The United States is resisting anything concrete on security guarantees. What the United States, the Trump White House's position is that they want to do a minerals deal with Ukraine. They want to do that commercial deal. And their argument is that should we do a major deal to benefit from Ukraine's minerals, then that becomes a de facto security arrangement, because if we are relying on getting a lot of Ukraine's vast mineral wealth and rare minerals, rare earths, then of course we're going to want to protect our investment. So it's very Trumpian to in fact make a security guarantee, not with soldiers, not with guarantees of people going their boots on the ground, but very Donald Trump to say that the security guarantee will come in the form of our commercial interests. Now that's a real change of mindset for the way the United States works. I mean, this is not the only area we're seeing that the US, the rules are being rewritten or thrown out the window under Donald Trump. This is one of those things that's being thrown out the window.
And while this is happening, or ahead of it, a drone attack, Ukraine's biggest since Russia's invasion. What was the damage with that? What do you make of the timing of it?
Significant timing, Gemma, because we'll remember a few days ago, after Donald Trump had essentially ejected Volodymyr Zelensky from the White House, Russia took advantage of that, and Russia launched a couple of particularly damaging attacks on Ukraine. Donald Trump said famously, anybody would do the same thing. Now, I don't think most people would agree with that. I don't think anybody would just go and kill civilians in the numbers that Vladimir Putin has been killing civilians on an industrial scale over the last 3 years. He's been firing 2,000-pound missiles into apartment buildings. Now, it's interesting here because I think the Ukrainians heard what Donald Trump said then. Anybody would do the same, and thought, OK, if anybody can do it, we can do it. So Ukraine has use this bizarre sort of opening, this window, to launch a particularly major attack on the Russians themselves. So I think this is the Ukrainians' way of saying two people can do the same thing.
And just briefly, John, Australia's taken part in a security meeting in Paris to discuss support for Ukraine if there is a peace deal. What's come from that?
Well, I think what will happen next is, if there is an end to this dreadful war, is the reconstruction of Ukraine. Just like in Gaza, the reconstruction of Gaza. With these two wars, Gaza and Ukraine, there's been so much destruction that it's one thing to end the fighting, but then the real challenge comes in how to rebuild Ukraine, as in how to rebuild Gaza. And I think Australia wants to play a major role in the rebuilding of Ukraine.